The end of the world, the end of times, the apocalypse, and we've already talked about that. What Luke is talking about here is what they're already seeing. They're already seeing that the world is a mess. They're already seeing that bad things are happening. This isn't a prediction of the future, but a telling, a truth-telling. An honest attempt to understand what is going on in the world. Isn't life like that? I feel like this text feels like a careening, a flowing, a rapid approach at something else. Advent is a time that we get to think about the different ways in which God comes to us. One, in the form of a baby, the form that we're most familiar with for Advent because we're thinking about Christmas. Or maybe we're trying not to think about Christmas, but it's really hard. People already have their lights up, and I got excited and I thought, wow, I really need to get my lights up so that I'm not the only one without them. I have this giant tree next to my house, and I keep saying to myself, next year, well, last year was the first year I did this, but I thought to myself, next year I'm going to hire somebody to put lights on it because it's gigantic. And I failed to recognize that we were careening toward Christmas, and I didn't do it. So now I'll think to myself again, next year I'm going to get a landscaping company to decorate that tree. So the first way is in the form of a baby. The second way is in the form of the second coming. Thinking about the advent of the second coming, awaiting the second coming. That's one of the things that we talk about heavily in Advent, and it might seem weird because we get texts like this talking about the end of the world. And the third way is God comes to us every day, all the time. God keeps coming to us. But this text makes me think about this careening. Like we're all headed toward the edge of a cliff and we're about to fall off and things keep happening. Often we talk about things coming in threes. Like one bad thing happens and then another bad thing happens and you're like, well, another one's bound to happen because these things always happen in threes. So as I was spending my Thanksgiving holiday in the Poconos at my in-laws' cabin, we got the news alerts about the new COVID variant. And I thought to myself, it's more of this careening, heading towards the edge of a cliff, and I got really anxious about it because it felt a lot like it did in March 2020. We don't know how contagious. We don't know how deadly. We don't know. But we have to watch it. We have to worry. We shut down travel from certain places. We get really concerned because, I don't know about you, but recently, for me, COVID seems like more of a threat because it's been very personal. So Omicron is coming. Fear. Again. This constant careening toward the edge of a cliff, and when we get to the cliff, what will happen? Recently, I've been getting a lot of calls from people for me to come and visit, which I really appreciate because I didn't get to do a lot of it at my previous call. So as I've been visiting with members of our congregation, I hear different stories. I hear stories about their lives, things that are happening in their lives, experiences that they're having. I hear about their faith, their doubt, all about their life. And there's one thing that every single group or individual has in common. The same refrain, and it's a refrain that's in my heart often, and I'm sure that all of you have felt it at a time or two. Why aren't my prayers being answered? Where is God? In the midst of all of this careening towards the edge of the cliff, in the midst of wondering why all these bad things keep happening, in the midst of wondering how long, O Lord, will this last? We don't need the signs and the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth's distress. We don't need the Bible to tell us these things to know that they exist, because we experience them all the time. We have signs in our own lives. We experience the hard stuff all the time. Life has been so hard for all of us. The global pandemic aside, there are always things happening in our lives. The gospel tells us that there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the seas and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Doesn't sound like good news. A lot of bad stuff. Fainting from fear and foreboding. Even if we're not fainting, we can relate to that. But what happens next? Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to take place, stand up, raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. That's the caveat. And maybe it doesn't always seem like enough that despite the bad things, despite the hardships, despite how hard each and every day might be, despite how many things could possibly go wrong in one day or 1 week or 1 month, then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. This is talking about the second coming. But I think it's also talking about the ways that God comes to us each and every day. Despite the hardship, God shows up. We know that God shows up in our baptismal waters, that God reaches down in our baptismal waters, and before we can ever say yes to God, God says yes to us. And week after week, at this table, Jesus shows up, comes to us in bread and wine, comes to us in wafers and juice to sustain us, to fill us with spiritual strength to deal with the days ahead. People will faint from fear and foreboding, but they will see God. God will come with power and great glory. Stand up, raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Amen.